everybody. We're back again with another lecture that is going to help with the Chapter 8 discussion forum. This chapter is on motivation and emotion. It opens up with a discussion of emotion, and then it segues into a discussion of motivation. So we're not gonna cover every single thing that the chapter talks about, but we're going to cover like some of the main points basically. Okay. So first things first, what is going on with emotion? So emotion in and of itself, it comes from the Latin word movere, which means to move. And both motivation and emotion, they both kind of come from the same word as their root word. And basically, what they both mean is that it's causing you to move. It's influencing you to exhibit some kind of behavior, some kind of feeling, etc., etc. When it comes to emotions, emotions are said to have multiple elements that are at play when you're feeling any kind of emotion. So the first part of it is the physiological response. So you're going to feel something in your body when you are experiencing an emotion. The second element to it is your cognition, which is your thoughts. So not only are you experiencing some kind of reaction in your body physically, you are also experiencing some kind of thought or thought process as you are experiencing an emotion. And then both of those two things tied together, they then lead into the third element of emotion, which is your behaviors. So you are going to have a physiological reaction, which is a reaction within your body. You are going to have a cognitive reaction, which are, psychological components, your thoughts, how you're thinking about this thing. And then you're going to have a behavioral reaction, which is what you actually do when you experience that emotion. When it comes to where emotion is located in the brain, we're going to talk in a couple of slides about different parts of the brain that are associated with emotion. But emotion in and of itself is experienced in multiple parts of the body as well as multiple parts of the brain. So we'll just keep that in mind. There are certain parts that seem to target emotions more than others, but it's not that any one part is like only at work when we're experiencing an emotion. All right. So, now we're going to go into a couple of the theories of emotion. This is not exhaustive at all. There's actually way more theories of emotion than the ones that are here on the slide, but we're just going to talk about a couple of them just to start things off. So, William James and Carl Lange, both of them kind of were working separately from each other, but around the same time, and they both kind of came up with a similar theory of emotion as far as like how the whole process works. And what William James and Carl Lange proposed was that when we experience emotions, the way that it happens is first we have a trigger. So we have something in the environment that triggers us. And then once we are triggered by whatever it is in the environment, which is good or bad, it doesn't have to be a bad thing just because we're using the word trigger. Trigger just means it's stimulating you into action. So you have some kind of stimulus that is stimulating you into action. And then based on what type of emotion you are supposed to feel, specific parts of your body will exhibit a physiological response. So they're saying that you're going to experience a trigger or a stimulus, your body is going to respond accordingly, and then after your body responds accordingly, then you attach a label to it and decide, oh, I am feeling this emotion. So, for example, let's say you're afraid of snakes. You're walking and you notice that in the grass, a huge snake just sprouts up out of nowhere. What they would propose is that your body would immediately react in a physiological way that would correspond to fear. And then because it's reacting in that way, you would then label your emotion as fear and then feel the fear. So, as you can imagine, there's a few different problems with that theory because, like, sometimes it seems like we automatically have a label before our body even has a chance to respond. And there's a few other examples as well, but that's the main one. Like, sometimes we can actually have a reaction before we even or we can label our emotion before we even have a chance to respond physically, so to speak. So that one had a little bit of merit to it, but it just fell kind of short. So then we have Schachter and Singer. They actually came up with something called the two-factor theory of emotion. And theirs is kind of similar to this one, except what they say is that instead of a specific physiological response to your stimulus or to your trigger, instead of your body reacting in one specific way to each type of trigger, what happens is your body just responds with a general physiological response. So instead of like having a specific reaction for fear, a specific reaction for happiness, a specific reaction for surprise, etc., your body just has one general global response. And then based on that global response, we know that we are feeling something. And then what we do is we say, okay, I'm feeling something. What is the something that I'm feeling? Oh, it must be fear because of the stimulus. Now I'm looking at the stimulus. Now I can apply a label to it. So my body did something. And because my body did something and I see this snake right in front of me, that means I'm afraid, essentially. So that one tried to get it a little bit better, I guess, and tried to be more specific and more detailed about how our emotions are experienced, but that one also kind of falls a little bit short. So both of them have a little bit of merit to them, but they both kind of fall short. Then we have the different parts of the brain that are associated with emotion. So as we said before, multiple parts of the brain are at work when we're experiencing emotions, but some of the main parts that are playing the hugest roles are the thalamus and the amygdala. So what ends up happening is your thalamus is like a middleman, so to speak, in your brain. So you experience, like, you see something, you hear something, like something happens in the environment that gives you that trigger or that stimulus, and then based on your reaction to that stimulus, it is sent to your thalamus, and then your thalamus then relays that information to your amygdala, letting you know that you're going to have an emotional reaction, essentially. And then your amygdala sends it to your cortex to help you interpret whatever it is that you are actually experiencing, and then you experience the emotion. So it's kind of like, it seems like this long, drawn out process, but it happens pretty rapid fire when we are experiencing the actual emotion. But what is happening is that there are specific mechanisms at play. So we are seeing, hearing, we're experiencing some kind of trigger. That the thalamus takes that trigger, sends it to the amygdala, and then the amygdala sends the message back through the cortex to the thalamus, and then it allows us to experience whatever emotion is that we're feeling. All right. So we talked about how what is actually happening when it comes to emotion. Like, we talked about, like, potential theories of emotion, and once again, those are not exhaustive. There's more theories of emotion as well, but we just don't have time to get into all of them. But so what about the way that we show our emotions? So one of the one of the things that theorists state is that regardless of the emotion that we are feeling, we're going to show that emotion in some kind of way. So we're going to exhibit that emotion, and different emotions are exhibited to different degrees. So some emotions will be more subtle, some emotions will be more profound, some emotions will be more hidden or guarded, and some emotions will be more loud, essentially. But regardless of how we show our emotions, what theorists state is that regardless of how we are showing our emotions, pretty much across the world, everybody experiences the same basic emotions. And because everybody experiences the same basic emotions, everybody is therefore able to recognize the same basic emotions in other people. So, in other words, emotions are kind of universal, so to speak. So, universally, all across the board, we all experience emotions. We all are able to recognize the emotions in ourselves, and also we are able to recognize emotions in other people. All right, so tying more into this universality of emotions, there are different arguments about which emotions specifically people can pinpoint, but there's five basic ones that they say are the most universal of all. Not to say that you can't recognize emotions outside of these, but these are the five, like, most basic of the basic. And then what is believed is that all other emotions will stem from these five emotions. So the five emotions that are considered to be the most basic are anger, disgust, fear, happiness, and sadness. So those are the five, like, global emotions. And then any other emotion that we experience, according to emotional theorists, they state that those emotions are going to be an extension of the one of the core emotions. So for example, if we have somebody being upset, that would stem from anger. Somebody being irritated, that would stem from anger, etc., etc. Somebody being filled with rage, that would stem from anger. So essentially, each emotion, it has a core, and then from that core emotion, it has different extensions of it, essentially. So happiness, like, one of the extensions of happiness would be joy. One of them would be contentment. One of them would be, just feeling good, feeling cool, etc., etc. So list goes on and on. And then there's a few other emotions that are still kind of question marks, but they say that these emotions may also be kind of universal, where people can, regardless of where you are in the world, you can recognize them. So one is embarrassment, surprise, amusement, guilt, shame, and pride. They can also be interpreted across the world, with different studies that they've done. All right. So, one other thing that ties into our emotions that we have not 100% talked about yet, but it kind of ties into the physiological or the behavioral side of emotions, is our facial expression. So, our facial expressions are said to play a very strong role in our emotions. Number one, we with every emotion that we experience, there is a facial expression that is attached to it. And then number two, regardless of where we are in the world, because of the whole universal aspect to emotions, regardless of where we are in the world, the same facial expressions will generally mean the same things. So a smile, in terms of our facial expression, will pretty much mean happiness, regardless of where you go. A frown, regardless of where you go, will indicate anger or upset or some kind of negative feeling. And then the list goes on and on. So, regardless of where you are in the world, smile means a smile. A smile means happiness. A frown means sadness. And the list goes on and on. So, the facial feedback hypothesis states not only that facial expressions are universal, meaning that the same facial expressions are used all across the board for the same things, or and then that they naturally flow from people. Um, it also states that when we are showing a facial expression, what ends up happening is we are able to recognize that facial expression in ourselves. And if somebody else is showing that same facial expression or even a different one, we're able to recognize that facial expression in somebody else. So if somebody else is smiling, we can recognize that. If we're smiling, we can recognize that. And what also another thing according to this hypothesis is not only can we recognize facial expressions, also when we show a facial expression, that will correspond, like it will kind of lead to like a causal reaction of us feeling that emotion that is corresponded to that facial expression. So in other words, if we smile, then we will have a tendency to feel more upbeat, more happy. If we frown, we will have a tendency to feel more upset, regardless of how we were feeling before we smiled or frowned. So let's say we're just having a pretty neutral day, then all of a sudden we just start smiling and we continue to smile for a period of time. Well, what happened is our mood will start to uplift. And let's say that we're also in a neutral kind of zone, and then we start scrunching our face up like we're upset. What can end up happening is we will start to feel more down, feel more low in our emotions. So there's a lot of things that tie into the facial feedback hypothesis. All right, so what about around the world? We already kind of talked about this a little bit, but just like those core emotions that we talked about, those five basics and then a few others, how they're recognized all across the world. Same thing has been shown with facial expressions. So when people are shown different facial expressions across the world, even if they're not given any other real context to it, what ends up happening is people are able to recognize the facial expressions of other people. It's usually easier for them to detect the facial expression for people within their own culture, but even when you look at somebody from across another culture, you can still detect their facial expressions as well. They also did the same thing with body language. They showed like different clips of people, either having arguments or having a discussion, et cetera, and like there's no words, like people don't know what they're saying, et cetera, et cetera. And they found that just off the strength of body language, gestures, XYZ, people can still interpret how a person is feeling, even when there's no sound, even if there's no words. The same kind of gestures, the same kind of body language kind of is universal as well. Also, they did the same thing with music, where they had music. Also, they played like music that would be more upbeat, more uplifting, music that would be more sad, etc., etc. And they found that across the board, people also can recognize the differences in music. Like this song is supposed to make me feel happy. This song is supposed to make me feel sad, etc., etc. And the list goes on and on. So, and also tone of voice is another one that they did. So they had people watching videos where they were hearing the words, but they don't speak that language, so they don't know what the person is saying. But they also can detect just from the tone of voice if a person is, talking in a happy way or if they're talking in a sad way, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot that kind of goes into it, and a lot that is universal about not just feeling the emotion, but also being able to recognize the emotion in other people. All right. But tying into that, every culture across the world also has rules for how and why and when emotions can be shown, and depending on the culture that we are in, the different rules will apply in different ways. Like for instance, in the United States, we generally have a culture where you're allowed to show emotions like openly, publicly, etc., etc. However, even within the United States, if you look at like men versus women, what will have a tendency to happen is that there are different, not necessarily there's a rule book somewhere saying like men should do this, women should do that, but as far as the way that our society is structured, women are allowed and conditioned to be more emotionally expressive, meaning that women are kind of from childhood like taught to speak more about their emotions, taught to express their emotions more verbally, etc., etc., and allowed to actually openly show their emotions more. So therefore, women are said to be higher in emotional expressiveness than men. And then men, when they've done studies on this, they've dug like kind of deep on this, and they found that men will feel the same emotion that a woman is feeling. However, they may not display it to the same extent, and they may not express it to the same extent. And when they do express it, they will express it in a different way than a woman would. Like for instance, a woman might sit there and talk about her emotions and say, "I'm feeling this way," etc., etc., etc. But when it comes to a man, he might just engage in an activity that is showing whatever that emotion is that he is experiencing. Other things that tie into display rules for emotions is when we are experiencing emotion that we're kind of not supposed to show at that moment. There are four different things that we can have a tendency to do. So the first one is something called intensification, and that's where we will kind of exaggerate an emotional reaction to a situation. And this is usually when we see it as appropriate to do so. Like for instance, let's say that a child is showing us a drawing, and the drawing is not really that great, but you could tell that they're excited about it. So you're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, that was good," and you're like given this heightened state of emotion because you know that they're excited about it. So that would be an example of intensification. De-intensification is the exact opposite of that. So that is where you are feeling a certain type of emotion, but in this given moment, you're not supposed to be like showing that emotion. Like for instance, if your boss like tells you off and says, you better do this, you better do that, or you're gonna be written up and you're gonna be suspended. You can't go off back at your boss unless you want to get fired. So what you have to do is you kind of like have to hold your emotions back a little bit. You may still show a little bit that you're upset by the situation, but you have to respond in a somewhat calm manner to whatever it is that your boss is saying. So you kind of have to subdue your emotions slightly. And then the next one is kind of similar to this one. It's called masking, and that is where you are feeling one emotion, but because of the situation that you're in, you're not able to show that emotion openly. So instead, you have to show the opposite emotion openly. Like for instance, let's say that you're playing a competitive game and you really really wanted to win, but you lost. If that happens, if you want to be a good sport about it, you're supposed to, act happy for the other person, like, oh yeah, congratulations. But on the inside, you're like, no, that should have been mine. So masking your emotion, you really feel a little upset on the inside, but on the outside, you're supposed to show the exact opposite. You're supposed to pretend to be happy for the other person, even though you may not be. Um, and then last but not least, neutralizing. So neutralizing is also similar to the de-intensification, and that is where you are not allowed to display any emotion in this specific thing. So therefore, what you do is you just kind of keep all of your facial expressions as neutral as possible. Like for instance, in this situation where let's say that you're playing a card game and you're not trying to give away your hand, what you might do is you will just hold as neutral of a facial expression as possible so that other people won't be able to guess if you have a good hand, if you have a bad hand, etc., etc. So these are just different rules under different circumstances that we will engage in depending on the context that we're in when it comes to emotion. All right. So now all of that was emotion, and it might have felt like a lot, but that was nowhere near all the stuff that's in the chapter. You have to like read the rest of the chapter to get everything. So now we're gonna segue into motivation. And motivation, it also, as we said in the very beginning, it stems from that Latin word movere, which means to move. So if anybody's motivated by something, they are being compelled, impelled, influenced. They're being caused to act in some kind of way. So it's something that is leading you, influencing you, impacting you, causing you to act in some kind of way. Um, and just like there's a whole bunch of theories of emotion, there are also a bunch of theories of motivation. So one of the biggest, or not the biggest, but the first theories of motivation was something called the instinct theory, and it was developed by William James. He kind of borrowed slash stole his idea from Charles Darwin. So, he believed that everything that we do, the reason why we do it is because we have a goal in mind that we are trying to achieve, and that goal that we are trying to achieve is based on our instincts. So we did something, and our instinct told us that we need to do this to accomplish this goal. So that was the very first theory of motivation. It was purely biological, purely instinctual. Your instincts are leading you or forcing you or influencing you into action because you have a natural instinct to do this thing that is causing you to engage in that behavior and then therefore hopefully achieve the result that you are looking for. It sounded good for a while and people actually kind of liked it. They even came with a whole list of different instincts, hundreds of different instincts that people can be born with that lead us to do certain things. But as they examined it a little bit closer, they realized that it wasn't the best theory. Like, yeah, we do have instincts, but instincts don't necessarily seem to give us a full enough explanation for why we do everything that we do. So some things we could say, okay, that was instinct and that makes sense 100%. But when it comes to like more complex things that we end up doing, it gets kind of screwy. And it's kind of like, so my instincts told me that I wanted to go play in the park. My instincts told me, I wanted to go shopping. My instincts told me. So a lot of things that's more complex, it can't be explained by instinct theory. So it was a nice start to like open the door to emotions, at least on a biological side, but it did not paint the full picture. So other theorists kind of came along and tried to like build upon it. So one of the next set of theorists who came along and tried to build upon it were drive theorists. So essentially what they stated is that, yeah, motivation is still biological on their perspective. It's still biological, but what is happening is instead of us being driven by instincts, what is happening is our body is feeling some kind of imbalance. So homeostasis is a state in our body or a physiological state where we feel like we are completely at peace, basically. So we feel like we're not hungry, we're not thirsty, we're not missing anything biologically. And if we feel like everything is perfectly at peace, then we will feel fine and we will have homeostasis. But the moment we get hungry, the moment we get thirsty, the moment we get tired, the moment something biological happens where our need is not being met, what ends up happening is there is a drive that is created on a biological side. So a drive is created biologically, and that is leading us into action to alleviate whatever it is that is our biological need. So, for example, if we're sleepy, the only thing that's going to alleviate that is us taking a nap or going to sleep for the night. If we're hungry, only thing that's going to alleviate that is we're going to eat something. And according to drive theory, the only way to reduce those drives and make them go away is to fill that biological need. So that theory is provided a little bit more expansion. So it's like, okay, we're going somewhere, we're getting somewhere. But even the drive theory, even though it could provide a very good biological basis for why we do certain things, it still did not tap into psychological reasons for why we might do certain things. So that's where more theories kind of came to the forefront. So when it started to kind of segue into more of the psychological or emotional components or even social components to motivation, one of the first theories that was kind of brought forth was something called the hedonic principle. And essentially, it came from like philosophers from a long time ago, but then they kind of like, revamped it and created a psychological terminology for it. But essentially, there's something called the hedonic principle, and it basically states that on the psychological side or the emotional side or even on the social side, what ends up happening is what motivates us to do something is that we want to feel good, basically. So people do stuff because they want to feel good. So to answer that question of why we went to the mall and shopped till we dropped, the reason why we did it is because we wanted to feel good. It felt good to do that shopping and get all that stuff that we wanted, so we did it because it felt good. Why did we not go and take that test for whatever class we were supposed to take? Because it wouldn't feel good because we didn't study and we feel like we were gonna fail, so we did not do that. So our main goal, according to the hedonic principle, is that we are trying to gain pleasure and we are trying to discard pain. We are trying to make pain go away and make pleasure something that happens, basically. So in this theory, we are kind of shifting from the biological and we're shifting more to the psychological, emotional aspects of motivation. All right. So another thing that kind of ties into motivation and emotion is how we actually perceive our emotions and how we actually deal with our emotions when we do experience them. And that's particularly when it comes to like negative emotions. So everybody experiences a range of emotions: positive, negative, neutral, etc., etc. But when it comes to those negative emotions that we're experiencing, how can we manage them? How can we make them more bearable? Especially since we, according to motivation researchers, we are trying to live by this hedonic principle. We're trying to gain pleasure and avoid pain. So like, how can we do that mentally? Like, how can we do that psychologically? How can we do that emotionally? What they say is that one of the main strategies that help you to regulate your emotions is, number one, to first recognize the emotion that you're experiencing. So recognize the emotion that you're experiencing, be able to accurately label that emotion that you're experiencing, and then if it is a negative emotion, find a way to reinterpret the situation to make yourself feel better about it, essentially. So for example, let's say that you lost your job. Nobody likes to lose their job unless they want to be broke or unless they have another job lined up. Let's say you lost your job, you don't have a job lined up, you don't have any money in your savings, it's about to get real. If that happens, the way to way to reappraise that situation, or the way to like reinterpret that situation, is to be like, okay, I'm upset, I lost my job, I kind of feel like things are about to get real because I don't have any money, I don't have any savings, I don't have any other jobs lined up. However, I could go start filling out applications, I could have a little bit of time off, I can take this as a break, a recharge, a reset, etc., etc., and I can get back out there and keep on pumping. So if we reinterpret the situation to try to like kind of look for the bright side, so to speak, and try to find a way to navigate the negativity of whatever the experience is, then that can actually help us to fare better in that situation and actually have a better outlook and a better outcome in life overall. All right, so back to motivation. So another theory of motivation. So we talked about the instinct theory, we talked about the drive theory, we talked about the hedonic principle. Um each one of those looks at an aspect of motivation, but Abraham Maslow, who was a humanistic researcher, he tried to find a way to incorporate all aspects of motivation into one big theory, essentially. Um and I just learned recently that he might have actually stolen this theory from the Blackfoot tribe, the Blackfoot indigenous tribe, because from what I understand, he actually like observed them for a couple weeks, like him and one of his colleagues. They observed these people and they like, looked at their way of life, their culture, etc., 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 and then kind of like took everything that they said and made his theory out of it. It didn't give them any credit for it. So like, Maslow, I don't understand like what's going on here. But nevertheless, he is given credit for coming up with what's known as the hierarchy of needs. And his attempt with this theory, from inspiration of others, most likely, is that what he did was he tried to find a way to incorporate the psychological, the biological, like the social, every aspect of need that we would have, and he tried to put it into one big theory to explain our motivations, essentially. So what he says is the overall goal for mankind is that we are trying to achieve our highest self. We are trying to achieve the best self, the highest us, the epitome of me, basically. That is what we are trying to achieve, according to Abraham Maslow. But in order for us to achieve the us, the ultimate us, or the epitome of us, we have to go through certain levels, basically. We have to meet certain needs before we can achieve our highest self. So at the basis level, or the lowest level, we have what's known as our physiological needs. So food, water, shelter, things like that. If we don't have those things, we're not caring about trying to achieve our higher self. We're hungry. So like, feed me first, and then we'll talk about achieving my higher self. So once you have your food, then the next level is a safety and security. So like, do I have to walk around like with my head on a swivel, or like, am I cool? Like, do I feel like peace? And once you feel that peace, you feel like nothing's gonna come after you. You don't have to feel paranoid. Then you can move on to the next need, which is belonging and having a sense of security social wise. So like having friends, having family members, having people in your corner. If you feel like you have all of those things, then you feel safe and secure on a social level. So then after that, you can segue into esteem needs, where because you have a grounded and safe relationship with other people and it's healthy, what ends up happening is you start feeling good about yourself or better about yourself. And then once you start feeling better about yourself, you can start setting goals for yourself. And then once you set those goals, you'll be more likely to achieve those goals. And then once you achieve those goals, you are said to have achieved the epitome of you, which is self actualization. And what's not listed on this slide is there's actually a higher level than self actualization, and it's called transcendence, and that is essentially where you have achieved your highest self, so to speak. So therefore, you go on and help somebody else to achieve that same thing. Um, so his theory was the first one that really tried to encompass all of the above for every single aspect of motivation. So the biological, the psychological, the social, like the every single aspect, it tried to gather them all. Um, but there was a few caveats with it. So the first caveat is that how do we even know what our highest self is? So like, yeah, we're trying to achieve our highest self according to Maslow, but like, what is your highest self? And then like, let's say that you feel like you know what your highest self is. Like, what if you're wrong? Like, what if you could have actually gone higher, or what if your higher self is actually lower than what you thought it was? So like, there's kind of a few holes in it, in this theory. And also even Maslow himself, he kind of proposed that even though people strive for their highest self, a lot of times they may like feel like they achieved it, but then like things will happen in life that kind of bring them back down a little bit, and then they have to strive for something else and then go back down again and then strive for something else. So he believed that there's a lot of peaks and valleys in our life. Instead of us just going on a straight road of success, it's a lot more murky than it seems. So it's a nice try. And it did have some merit to it, but it may not be a perfect theory, just like none of the other theories were perfect either. All right, so last but not least, we are shifting more to another aspect of psychological motivation, and that is intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation, if we want to simply put this, we will say intrinsic motivation is doing anything that we do because we actually like the thing that we're doing. So for example, let's say that you're in school underneath a certain major, and the reason why you're taking that major is because you are genuinely interested in the topic and you actually care about it. If that was the case, then that you would be intrinsically motivated for whatever that major is that you chose. On the flip side, everybody probably knows somebody who has chosen a certain major not because they actually care about whatever it is, but because they want the money that that major brings, or they were told that that was a good major that people should achieve, or they found out that there was a lot of jobs in that major and they were good jobs that allow a lot of advancement, etc., etc. Um, so anything that would be one of those answers would be more of an extrinsic motivation. And that is where you are doing something because of something outside of you actually wanting to do it yourself. So like there's no genuine like curiosity or joy or happiness associated with it. It's more so you have external reasons for wanting to do that thing. So intrinsic motivation, you do it for the sake of doing it because you like it. Extrinsic motivation, you do it because there's some other reason that is compelling you into action. All right, so that is our discussion of motivation and emotion. Even though we talked for quite a while, once again, this was not extensive at all. I just tried to give like the basics of motivation and emotion. There's more theories of both of these, so there's actually more theories of emotion, and there's actually more theories of motivation as well. But I just tried to get to the basics with you guys. So hopefully this helped. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we will be back again with another one very soon.